I have the honor this morning of moderating an illustrious panel. It's a small panel, so we'll be very interactive, and we're happy to take questions from the floor. I believe there are mics, or just shout really loudly. Just a little bit about me before I introduce my colleagues here. I have been at Salesforce for some time, and I actually came into Salesforce to revamp the customer success program. It has been around at Salesforce for probably 5 or 6 years, but probably not terribly well defined. And I put a lot of definition, role clarity, built a community, built a career path and leveling guides, and basically just treated it as a real role within the company. And so today, in our customer management or customer success world, we're probably up to about 450, maybe a little bit more, people who do that role within Salesforce's Customers for Life organization. So that's my background. I'd like to start by introducing Bill Binge from Marketo. So Bill has great sales background, has been at BEA, PeopleSoft, was at Oracle with me way back when, and has the sales leadership role at Marketo, and has been really very instrumental to their amazing sales growth over the past few years. And congratulations on the IPO. Great news for the tech sector. I'm sure great news for many of you and your companies as you look to that as the proof that IPOs are back and we can get funding from the public markets. And then I'd like to introduce Mike Rutz from Angie's List. And Mike has been with Angie's List since 2006. Has the leadership role, the sales leadership role at Angie's List, but has a great background in healthcare, and is very active in political and advocacy roles in Indiana as well. So thank you for joining us, Mike and Bill. So, just to start out this morning, since Marketo has just had a fabulous IPO, and Angie's List went public a couple of years ago, do you have any advice for Bill in terms of being a sales leader for a newly public company?
Yes, but I probably won't give it to you in front of everybody here. Probably like off in the hallway. No, I actually, we talked about this on the telephone real briefly, and it took me a second to think about all these lessons that I've learned, because there are so many of them. It's difficult to boil them down into just a couple. First and foremost is get ready to grow and move faster than you think you move fast. Like, just wait, it will move faster, and your processes will break, and you'll have to fix them and improve them. And it definitely forces you to be better, as the process always does. And then I think another lesson that we have, I think, been fortunate enough to see prior to actually having any issues with it is make sure you have infrastructure underneath the entire organization to support that growth. If you aren't ahead of the curve or prepared to be ahead of the curve, you're going to have trouble scaling, and it will make life very difficult for everyone. So that was, I think, one of the things that we have done really well among some other things that we probably haven't done as well as I would like, is just making sure that we have, whether it's technological or human infrastructure or process infrastructures, make sure that that's shored up. And then, you have to keep your force focused. You got to make sure that they're not, don't look at the stock price every day. It's going to go up. It's going to go down. People are going to say crazy things about you. Just do your job. The core business is acquiring customers, taking care of them, serving them. And if you do that well, everything is going to work itself out. And, I think fortunately we've been able to keep our eye on the ball there as well. So that's a couple lessons that I have learned. And then we'll talk out in the hallway.
Well said.
Thank you, Mike. Well, the topic for our panel today is really about the relationship between sales and customer success, between customer acquisition, customer retention, which is symbiotic. It's a very tight relationship. When I started at Salesforce, just a few months before that, our customer success organization actually reported up directly into our sales leadership, and then we broke it out into what is now the Customers for Life organization, which is our post-sales organization. So maybe, Bill, I'd like to start with you. If you could just tell us all a little bit about how your sales and customer success roles are set up at Marketo.
Yeah, I think we've taken a lot of pages from the Salesforce playbook because when Salesforce started off in the late 90s, they immediately came out and pursued the SMB market and then grew to go take on the enterprise space, verticals, and go worldwide. And we saw that as a really good plan. And so we've done a lot of very similar things to how Salesforce grew, being in an analogous space. One of the things we did was built our Salesforce fairly similarly. From a Salesforce perspective, we're a fairly direct selling organization, meaning that we don't use a tremendous amount of channels. We tend to use direct sales reps. And those folks we essentially segment by what kind of customer they call on. So we found that the old inside-outside model was giving way to a newer model, which was really segmenting your sales reps on what kind of customer they call on. And we have an SMB team and a mid-market team, and those tend to be fairly centralized teams, meaning they're all in the same location because there's a benefit that we can do for how we train them and get information communicated over to them. And then we have an enterprise team, and they're physically out in the territories where they call on so that we can reduce costs of travel and have a better level of services. And then we pair that with a customer success organization, which has several pieces to it. We have an enablement team as well as a professional services team that do the actual onboarding of customers. We have obviously a technical support team that answers the technical questions. And then we have a true customer success team, which really focuses their time and attention on ensuring that our customers are healthy and that they're renewing. Because when you're in a subscription business, everything comes down to renewing the customers and making sure that they're happy.
Thank you. So Mike, what about the teams at Angie's List?
So the way we have ours, our department structured and organized is really around an engagement funnel. You know, I mean, we start the only, I run the service provider side, so we sell coupon advertising and e-commerce advertising to service providers to take care of our members. And so our members are the ones that basically feed us the prospects or the service providers that they work with that we are able to go and call. But then we have to work them down through the funnel and really drive engagement. And that starts with, whether it's signing them up so they are on our business center and have their profile updated and they're actually giving review forms to members after they service them, or it's buying advertising. And which really, deepens the engagement. It gives us an opportunity to actually, we sign an individual account rep to them at that point in time. And then it's all about driving engagement, getting them to upsell, participate in e-commerce, and really make sure that they are responding well to our members and taking care of them. If they don't take care of them, the members tell us, and then they're not eligible anymore. And that's really how the product works. And so we have an account management department that, I like customer success, though. I'm thinking that's a much better name than just account management. That's a very generic description, right?
Popular here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, it's nice. So that's why I come out here so much. We have them, and then we have a department that specifically drives some of the e-commerce engagement, which is where they might run the big deal, which is, it's our shameless Groupon clone, and storefront, which is where members can actually buy services on the site from Angie's List. So, and then we have an enterprise group that looks for relationships with national manufacturers and tries to decode the co-op infrastructure in some organizations and manufacturers that drives all the way down to the dealer relationships.
Thank you. And when I moved over from kind of a direct on-premise software company to Salesforce, which is a big SaaS or cloud company, I was struck by not only a philosophy around customer success, but just the fact that the subscription model means that you don't get any upfront capital expense. You don't get this bluebird deal that will hit your revenue for the quarter. You really have to maintain that relationship on an ongoing basis and make sure that the customer ends up renewing or continuing the service, which over the past 5 years, I think has become much more ingrained in the industry. So as sales leaders, you are responsible for the acquisition, whether you call the team customer success or account management, same team or different teams are responsible for that customer retention, care and feeding, so to speak. What is your expectation of the customer success type of function in relation to your main roles as sales leaders?
A couple thoughts there, but first I'm just curious, just so I can get a feel of the group here, who here is with a company that has less than 100 employees? Could you raise your hand just to get a feel? All right, so a good majority. And who here is at a cloud or a SaaS-based company? Also a large amount. All right, good. Then this is very relevant, I think. Naracha just shared that the CFL team, the Customers for Life team, was underneath sales until just a few years ago. Around the expectations question you asked, my thought is this, or my point of view is that if you're in a SaaS-based company and you're in a smaller company, meaning under 100 employees, it's a question of maturity of how far you're into your market. I think that it makes a lot of sense in the earlier days to have the customer success roll up through the sales organization. And I'll tell you why I have that point of view. Is if you're the team out there that's making customer commitments, and then you're also headed by the same person that essentially has to roll up and deliver on those customer commitments, I think you end up getting a really good parity. Now, there is a point, and you guys obviously experienced it at Salesforce, where you say, look, customer success is a business unto itself, and we need to put a head over that and have an entire organization of someone that focuses on that. And there is, I think, a time in every life cycle of a company that it makes sense to do that. We hit that recently as well, where it made sense to break it off. But in the early days, I think it's really important to have that, because that way you don't find yourself in that situation where you have sales out there selling really hard, trying to get a customer, and then when you hand it over to the customer success team that has to onboard and support that customer, they're saying that you oversold, right? You can kind of monitor and measure that if it's all rolling up to a specific place. So from an expectations perspective, that builds the crux of what I think, which is if you're really proud of your sales organization and think what they're doing is really good and selling well, then I think you want to have that same level of pride around your customer success. Meaning, if you never hear the words that we were oversold, that means you have good parity between your sales organization and your customer services or customer success organization. So my expectation is, and it's a little bit greedy from the sales side, is that they keep up, right, with the sales organization and keep up with the level of sales pace that we have.
What about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on that?
I think from my perspective, so the acquisition engine is huge and just cranks at a really fast pace, and the account management team that Amanda Jack, actually, who's in the audience here, manages. The first 6 months is really the most critical point in time for our service providers, because they're new to the product. They may not understand what they need to do in order to make it work for them. And so it is high touch, lots of education conversations, lots of just very consultative point in time in the relationship. And we need to make sure that we're staying on top of them. So we even split our team up, so we have a team that's dedicated to the first year of the relationship and managing that first year and that renewal. Because if we get them through that first renewal, then they stick with us. And then the relationship changes, and we have, that's when we start talking about things like upsells, and we start driving that deep engagement to where Angie's List is really embedded and is will drive not the entirety, but most of their marketing budget and marketing decisions.
Well, you mentioned upsell. I mean, obviously that is a great outcome to a successful relationship, not just the renewal, but the upsell. Obviously, for the acquisition, sales metrics are very clear, right? You have a number, did you sell that? What do you guys think about the metrics for customer success? There's obviously a renewal metric that I mentioned before, but what in your minds, I mean, how does customer success fuel future sales, and how do you think customer success teams should be measured?
There are certain operating metrics that I think give us, that are leading indicators as to whether or not the relationship is working for our customer. And if it's not, then we need to do something about it. So we try to take those metrics. In fact, that's what we're going to be using Gainsight for, is to make sure that we're surfacing all of the, whenever there's an account that might be in trouble or might not be performing as well as they would like or as we would like, we need to go and do something about it and engage that service provider and understand what is it that we have to do in order to make this relationship worth it for you. I think making sure that you understand what are the signals and that you have the infrastructure in place to actually detect and deliver the signals to the sales reps is really important, and will drive numbers at the end of the day. And making sure that that your sales reps and that your customer success representatives are thinking of this in terms of this isn't just sales, this is a partnership, and making sure that they are having the consultative conversations and not just always selling and saying, what do we need to do in order to make this work for you, and knowing exactly how to measure the success or failure of the product.
What about you, Bill?
I think certainly the renewal is incredibly important, but that's a trailing indicator, right? Because it's a binary event. You either got the renewal or you didn't. So what can you do to look upstream ahead of that to measure the health? Well, certainly if you have the ability to upsell your products, then upselling something during the course of the subscription probably shows a fairly satisfied customer. So those are two sales metrics that we think about. We've also incorporated in Net Promoter Score. I think especially in SaaS companies, that's a fairly common metric that lets you go out and occasionally touch the health factor of your customer base. And then certainly, the best thing about, and the reason I asked how many folks are in a cloud business, is you can go look and see what the usage is. So look at logins, look at utilization, see what parts of your product that your customers are absorbing and what parts they aren't. And that can guide a lot of thoughts about how your strategy, about how you package and price your product, how you do upsells and what you offer there, how you go and educate customers to get deeper into your product and things like that. So obviously there's the dollar metrics, but really I think Net Promoter Score and utilization are the key things that make you feel comfortable that your customer's happy with your product.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I agree, renewals is a trailing indicator. And same at Salesforce, you can monitor 180 days from the renewal date, but ultimately the life cycle is what do you track in between? How do you track the health? How do you track customer satisfaction? And basically it is a wonderful thing to be a cloud company and have access to the metadata and know logins and utilization and really have no shelfware. You can make sure that no shelfware exists. So that's a great point.
One thing that you guys have done for us, now that we are spending uber amounts of money on the product and the platform. Yes. We have someone who actually lives in Indianapolis who visits our office twice a week, who serves as a sort of consultant role, and he doesn't make commissions on selling new licenses or buying more data or anything. His whole job is to make sure that we are leveraging the product. Mm-hmm. So where are we not leveraging the product, and he can help us point that out and give us some ideas and opportunities about where to do that, and it's great. I understand why Salesforce has someone in that role. It makes perfect sense for you, and it makes perfect sense for us.
Mm-hmm. I think along those lines, again, back to my statement about maturity of where you are in your life cycle. If in your first 4 or 5 years of being a company and serving customers, there's a lot of things that you can do that are, I think, interesting and kind of edgy ideas on how you can set up your team. One of the things we did was we built our post-sales process to have renewals reps who were responsible for going and getting the contract signed and renewed. And then we had customer success folks who were responsible for just making sure the account renewed. And so we really measured them separately. One was measured on dollars. One was measured on, I don't care if this account renews for less than it was originally or more than it was originally. I just care about getting the account renewed. And there's a purity there that worked really well as a smaller company, that you knew what your mission was as a renewals rep or as a customer success rep, so that you could go out and work towards your mission. Now, as you evolve, I think that does change. And today we've gotten to a point where our customer success folks do want to know that they participated in helping grow an account. And so there is a component of their comp plans that takes into account the dollars that are renewed for. And that gives them skin in the game. That gives them skin that if it did drop, then that might hurt them. But if they were able to not only take a bad situation and turn it good, or take a good situation and make it great, that the customer came back and renewed and consumed more product, and that they get to benefit from that.
And I think there are so many flavors of approaches. So if you look at Salesforce's history, our CSMs used to do the renewals. So they did the customer success, and they also did the actual, let's get you to sign to renew for the future. That was a number of years ago. We did actually split the roles with a lot of shared metrics, to your point, right? So very much focused on the in-between health metric and an upsell metric as well. And I think, what you mentioned, Mike, is really interesting, because our philosophy has been for the customer success people to become trusted advisors. They're not, they have obviously skin in the game because they're Salesforce employees, and they believe in the company, but they don't have a number, and they're not there to close anything. Or if they recommend something, it's because they truly believe that it's the best fit. And I think that's worked well from a philosophy standpoint as well.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit on the phone about designing compensation plans and making sure they're driving right behaviors. We talk about renewal. That's certainly not a leading indicator of the success or failure of your product. There's so many other ways to measure how well you are serving them. And thinking about that in the context of compensation and driving behaviors of the individuals in the front lines is really an interesting way to look at certain tweaks that you can make on comp plans. Obviously, at the end of the day, renewal matters, upsell matters, revenue matters. But if your business is smart enough to figure out what drives that, it's certainly interesting to think about in the context of how do you drive those behaviors with your frontline reps.
You mentioned the CSMs, and they're, you have the person that comes twice a week that comes and supports you. We've grappled with that question quite a bit, is should a CSM carry an upsell quota, and should they be responsible for that? And our current mode of thought, which is always open to change, is that no, because like I said, going back to that purity of thought, our thought process is the CSM is really focused on either saving a bad situation or taking somebody where they're at a current plateau and getting them to absorb more of your product. And we really want them focused on that and not worrying about making a quota. And so we have that clear kind of line of thought. Like I said, sounds like you and your process went through a lot of stages of hitting some walls and finding our way around them. We hit our fair share of things too. So we'll try something and we'll measure it to see if we think that it's having the impact that we desire, and if it's not, we'll change. But for the last several years, we've had that mindset that essentially renewals and customer success are different things than upselling. So we've actually staged a different sales team to go back and do the upsell process so that we can keep those customer success and renewals folks focused on making sure the customer is successful with the product.
Our compromise at Salesforce is to have our customer success teams have a number for qualified opportunity generation. So they find an opportunity, they'll create an opportunity in the system and hand it off to the sales team. That's our in-between measure. So they don't have a number per se, but they have a number for the number of opportunities they should be expected to uncover in a given year. So, but despite all this, there's going to be friction, right? We'll try to, with the different compensation structures, minimize friction and try to align objectives. Have you guys seen friction in kind of a heavy hunter-farmer mode?
Everybody gets along. That's great. You never hear the sales reps talking about the account managers and vice versa. It's wonderful. No, that's one of those things. It's always going to exist because, if an account cancels before it gets to renewal, the sales rep is going to feel that in their compensation, and obviously they blame it on the account manager, and that stuff happens. But I think we've taken some steps to actually just reduce that chatter, because I think it's always going to exist, and at least with the way we have things structured at Angie's List. But if we can reduce it and make sure that the departments are working together and coordinated and trust one another, that's great. We actually use Salesforce in one instance to, every time one of our acquiring sales reps closes a deal, they actually have to go through Salesforce and basically check the boxes of, yes, I have done this, I've had this conversation with the service provider, he has all the contact information for the account manager, he's gotten his post-sale packet, et cetera, and that gets, once that's completed and the button is clicked, it gets shipped over to the account manager, and then the account manager has a lot more context to work with in the first conversation of what are the goals for this service provider in the first 6 months of the relationship, what expectations were set, was everything done the way we want it done and the process is followed? And that has helped a lot. We've had big deals that we're trying to close where the account managers actually get called into the conversation early. So before the deal has been closed, they're already meeting the account manager and they're playing a role in the sales process. And then, if the account manager is having trouble with the account early on, typically we'll encourage them to bring the sales rep into the conversation, whether it's in a conference call or whatever interaction, to lean on them to make sure that the individual who closed the deal is also helping to preserve the deal.
Yeah, there's absolutely always going to be friction. I mentioned the one was we initially had both sales and customer success roll up under me, and when we first disconnected that was where we first saw that it was the he said, she said. The customer success reps were saying the sales is overselling the deal, and the sales reps were complaining that the customer success folks, in the first 3 months of a life of one of our customers, that's the most critical time on getting them absorbed into the technology, is that they weren't doing their jobs in those first 3 months. And so we had to think about that. We had to think about, it's more than just structure of reporting to somebody, but how do you put in the right incentives and how do you measure things? And so we spent some time really thinking about how we match up what our offerings are after the fact. And so today our bigger friction is, we seem to have modulated pretty well on getting that balanced out, but our biggest friction today is that every customer always wants more support. They always want more training hours. They always want more enablement. They always want more something, and they always want for free. And it's tough. Going again back to the maturity cycle of your company, in our early days, our enablement package was pretty much unlimited for a customer. If we got a customer to buy our software, we were going to get them using it. And so it could be a practical professional services engagement that we delivered. And then as you start growing, you start putting things in boxes and say it's 25 hours or it's 12 hours of this or it's 10 hours of this. And you start getting a little more focused because you're running a business and you have to measure it on being able to get customers live in a replicable way so that you have a repeatable business that has some consistency in it. And so today the probably bigger friction is how do we make the right packages to get our customers live, and how do we make sure that the sales reps are aware of those packages and are educated well enough to really go out and sniff out their customer skill set and say, this is a brand new user, they're going to need a lot of services and a lot of help, versus this is a skilled, sophisticated user who might be able to get themselves further without having to rely on like training or SOWs and things like that. So we see a little bit more of the friction from that side.
Yeah, great point. So I think this has been a discovery for Salesforce as well, because customers want more. And we, 2 years ago, actually introduced the concept of a billable customer success manager. Different from professional services or training, those have very distinct functions. But for a large customer, if you're talking a global deployment, multiple continents, multiple divisions, you say assign them one person, the one person physically can't do all that, and they say we want 4 more. And so we kind of wised up after a while and said,
that's included, isn't it? That's included.
After a while we were like, well, one is, but you can you can contract for more services. And so it's actually been remarkably successful, really applied to very, very large customers, as you can imagine. But it's been remarkably successful the last 2 years. And it's not a money-making venture at all. It's obviously in our best interest to do that as well. It's a cost recovery, so to speak, pretty much zero margin. And it's actually taken off tremendously. So now when we do a big deal, the sales reps at Salesforce know this is part of the deal. Ask what the customer is looking for, and if appropriate, think about putting some more services in. So, we've been talking for a little while now. Did anybody in the audience have a question for any of the panelists here? Or we can just keep chatting, so.
I have one. How do you handle when your evangelist leaves the company, and now you have someone new, a new VP who has a different agenda? So how do you handle that and keep them as a customer?
So just to repeat the question so everyone heard, how do you handle it when, and this happens frequently, when the sponsor, the person you're working with, leaves the company and a new person comes in who has a different agenda? Do you guys want to? I mean,
Yeah.
you encounter that in sales all the time.
Yeah, yeah. We see that a lot. So Marketo has a little over 2,000 customers. And if you took all of the competitors in our space and you added us all up, we maybe have 15,000 companies that use our type of technology. So we're still in our infancy of people using marketing automation software. And so we face that dilemma a lot because we'll go sell the sales cycle, close the sales cycle, and we'll train, sometimes 1 or 2 people inside of an organization on how to use our software. And then, like you said, that evangelist leaves. And so, the plane's kind of flying on autopilot, but as we all know, they don't take off and land by themselves. So it's a really big dilemma because that's a key thing that I think leads to a lot of churn and attrition for companies is you lose your supporter. A new regime comes in or a new person comes in and maybe they like your competitor better or, they don't want to invest in your time. And so we've created a process inside of our company that we use we call it the safe switch process. And the idea there is kind of a safe passage idea that somebody comes in and makes a switch to the organization. We want to be able to go and recognize that. And what we do is we watch for logins going down. We look for usage of the product going down because we don't always recognize that. With a couple thousand customers, you're not always right on top of that. And we actually have a package in our system that we've created that's specific for taking somebody that has a running, functioning, and operational system and putting them through the Cliff's Note version, if you will, of an onboarding and a training. And it's something we do for free because we've packaged it up in a way with like a lot of online courses and things like that so that it's not a big drag on us back to the margin pressures that you eventually end up getting. But it's a way that if somebody has the mentality that they're willing to invest, that they will go learn our product and be capable of running it at a sufficient level. But that's the key challenge that I can't solve is do they have the mental investment level to want to go do that? So that's a big challenge.
I think another way to think about it also is preemptively. I mean, you obviously know who the decision maker is if you're working with them and they're bought in and engaged with your business, but try to get as many individuals at the business. Identify everyone's role and understand who they are and who carries the influence and get them engaged regardless of whether or not they are a decision maker at the front end. But the more front end engagement you have, if that transition happens and they rely on your product, should take care of itself whenever that transition occurs.
Yeah, I was struck by that when Jeffrey Moore was talking at the end where he talked about, he had his final slide, I think, was crossing the chasm and then the 4 gears kind of top down and bottom up, and you have to go both ways. Right? You can't just have one champion. You have to have lots of champions. And maybe there was one champion for the acquisition or the sales process, but as you're in post-sales into the account and you're thinking about customer success, I think it is important to build many, many champions so you're able to rely on others to talk about the business value, not just one person who would may have moved on. So.
Yeah, one other add on that is this sounds a lot easier than it is to actually pull off, but it took us about 5 years of our life to really get our point of view straight on it and be able to go deliver it. But one thing we tried to do was create a community, if you will, so that you could become a certified user of our product. And that was the type of thing that you'd want to put on your LinkedIn profile. It's the type of thing you'd want to put onto your resume. And the idea there was that if somebody left, number one, they take that with them. So they might go to their next company and pick up the phone, call you and say, hey, I want to bring you in here. But then number two is for the person that's coming in, that there's a benefit for them as an individual, that by learning this technology, it's something that's going to help you in your career moving forward by putting on your resume and putting it on your LinkedIn and having this certification level. And like I said, it sounds really easy. Let's just go build a test and let people take it and that type of stuff. But to really do it right so that you're not out just willy-nilly certifying a lot of people, you have to put a lot of thought into what that testing process looks like. But we have found that that's pretty good because we do have, out of 2,300 companies that use Marketo, we have several thousand people that are certified to be able to run the product.
Oh, that's a great number. So Angie's List obviously kind of very much ingrained in the way consumers think and work. Do you see maybe a little deeper, more deeply ingrained in kind of a marketing automation suite? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, the customers that we're dealing with typically are, they're small businesses that are just trying to keep their trucks busy over the next week or two. I'm generalizing. There's the spectrum of sophistication is broad, and we have to adapt to a variety of different circumstances for those businesses. For instance, there's one guy, a carpet cleaner in Indianapolis, who has been an advertiser on Angie's List since I can remember, who literally, I walked into their room one day, and this little boardroom in this carpet cleaning business, and on the wall they had a bunch of papers stapled together, these just different trails of paper, and I walked up to them and I realized they were Angie's List reports, and there were names at the top of each trail of stapled paper, and it was all their service techs. And then it was all the reports that the service techs generated off of Angie's List and from the members. And they were actually bonusing the service techs based on their service score, were you getting good or bad grades, and then how many reviews were you able to get from the Angie's List members. So they were, the marketing part of it evolved from just a marketing campaign to a total customer service campaign, and it was so ingrained in their business and the way they run their daily lives that they can't think of doing anything but Angie's List. And I had another gentleman that I spoke to the other day who he's tried every form of advertising in the book, and he's doing nothing but Angie's List right now. And so I think working to make sure that it becomes ingrained, educating them and helping them understand what do you have to do in order to leverage our product is key.
Great, thank you, thank you. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. Oh, let's take one more question. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, two questions. What is the skill set that you look for in a customer success person versus a typical account manager? Are they interchangeable? Could you actually transition one to another? And as a second part of that, who is responsible for lead generation for the customers when you're pushing business to your customers? Who takes that role? Are these two different people?
Okay, so let me repeat the question real quick. So skill set we look for in a customer success person, how that is similar or different to the front end account manager or salesperson. And secondly, leads. Whose responsibility is it and how are they handled? So you want to take that, Mike?
Sure. I think for a customer success rep, you're probably looking for someone who's a little more detailed, a little more willing to spend time trying to understand the wants and needs of the customer. Our frontline sales reps they probably spend less time doing that, although that is one of the things we coach and train is trying to understand what do they want to accomplish with our product and with our relationship. So I think it's less hardcore sales, and it's more just being able to understand and have that consultative conversation with the customer. What can we do? How do we make this work? And being able to understand the business, as well. We've talked about having, sort of subject matter expert representatives for, the carpet cleaning business is very different from the remodeling business. And trying to tailor the experience around the different margins and the different characteristics of the business. What was the second question?
Leads.
Lead gen.
That's probably better for you.
On the profile question, I'll give you some specifics. This is just our world, and again, this is Bay Area dollars because we're based here in San Mateo. When we went and looked at the profile for customer success folks, we kind of found the market fairly bifurcated. There were folks that were kind of the $115,000 and dollar more type of cost, and under 150, like 75 to 115,000 bucks. And what we found was the people above had a skill set and typically years of experience that went with it, that they could actually get into the product, meaning like lift up the hood and get on the phone with the customer and problem solve. And that created a whole set of dilemmas when we hired those folks, because those folks could actually almost go be tech support. And you don't want to go around your tech support group and have someone coming to a higher paid type of resource. But we saw people that could get into the product is essentially how I'd kind of give you the differentiation, versus people that could be air traffic controllers. They could listen to your problem and probably route you to whether it's tech support, education, development, customer success person, whatever the right group might be, and be able to walk you through that process and make sure that at the end that you were coming out of it, with a thumbs up type of thing. So from a profile perspective, the word you said was consultative. For the higher level folks, we were looking for people that had business skills in our specific industry that they could come and apply and not just talk technology and not just talk mechanics, but they could actually talk a little business. And that's why those people were $115,000, $120,000 and more. And the $75,000 to $100,000 or $115,000 folks were just a little bit less years of experience, probably a little bit more, like I said, focused on managing the process of making sure you got to the right place and your problem was solved. On the second question about lead generation for your customer base, I think it's a misnomer. Everybody always thinks about lead generation as being to drive a new customer, but if I look and I go benchmark against the most successful companies out there, I see them having 30, 40, 50% of their revenues being driven by their customer base. And so if you have a product that you upsell, a lot of companies, like when Marketo started off in 2008, we had one product, so there was no upsell. There was just, we sell the product and we renew. And then we start coming out with products that we could upsell. And those products you just have to look at as I have the ability now to go and market to my customer base, which is quite honestly like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Because it's a much smaller pond and you know who the folks are, and it's much easier to go get to the right person that you're going to go to. So I think your question was, who does that inside the organization? And I think, first of all, there's an interconnection between marketing, your marketing team helping drive a lot of the messaging and the content that you're going to go use. And then from there, I hate to say this again because I've said it a few times, but across our maturity as we've grown, we've had different people do it. Initially, we had the new business sales rep do it, but then we found that it distracted them from going and hunting and getting the new logos. And we decided that new logos was equally as important as selling back to the customer base. So we created an install base sales component. And you heard me share a few minutes ago that I think that our perspective is that people that sell into the install base are not the same people that serve and customer support the install base, because we want to keep those two functions clear. So it's just our opinion. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying for that profile, I think that it comes down to somebody that's focused on going back and being the farmer.
Great, thank you. Well, we have just a couple minutes left, so I guess in our closing, I'll pose it to you, Mike, first, and then to you, Bill. What is the one piece of advice, mistake to avoid? These are companies building up these functions and kind of thinking about their path as they grow. Any advice, any specific advice around customer success that you'd have for them?
Sure. I'll be Mr. Obvious here, and it's just listen to your customers. Whether it's a small business or an enterprise relationship, I think that strategically you approach them the exact same way, which is identify their needs and address them. Tactically, it may be very different, but you have to make sure that you're in touch with them and that you're interacting with them, and that you know exactly what it is they want. What's their number one complaint? We ask that a lot, actually, and we know what it is, and we've addressed that. And so what's the next number one complaint? I find that addressing the pain points drives satisfaction almost more than trying to make them happier, trying to move the happy needle. So pretty obvious, but that's my advice.
My number one is, if you're a younger company, bend over backwards to get your customers successful, because they're going to become your advocates and the champions. It's easy to start looking too far out in the distance and say, well, what about when we have a dozen customers or 50 customers or 100 customers? Those early days, you got to think about just the next customer and making sure that you did all that work to get them. And your sales cycle could be a week, it could be 9 months. Could be a long sales cycle. It doesn't matter. Make sure you go and get those early customers successful. And then as you do get a little bit of scale and you do get a little bit of volume and you're having customer experience, which is really beneficial because Your sales reps are getting confidence on how to sell the product. Your enablement and customer support teams are hearing what the customer is asking for and learning how to respond. Your development team's getting that feedback and hopefully building a product. And that cycles all the way back to your marketing team who's saying, okay, now we know how to go message this out in the market. Look out the windshield and start planning, because if you're going to go enact something like a net promoter score, if you're going to go put in systems, you really have to look at what that's going to have an impact on your business, 9, 12 months down the road. It takes a little bit of thought to see how the interconnects are going to happen between other systems, how things are going to happen process-wise between your different parts of your organization. When a customer shuts off, how does finance get alerted to know that to stop billing, that type of thing? It takes a lot of work. And so once you do get the scale going, you go through this transition process of moving from looking at everything from weekly and monthly type of perspectives to now I have to look at things from a quarterly and kind of a half year to maybe even an annual perspective. And just be aware of that change. It's hard because you get into your groove, you get into your routine, and it's hard to say, okay, I have to kind of take a little wider view of what's going on with my customer base.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're at time, so thank you for your attention. And thanks to Mike and Bill.